Welcome to Soul Care with Stevie Boy, episode 11. We're in the book of Philippians, still in chapter 1, and I know we're going at a snail's pace. We have set the book up, we've looked at the introduction, and Paul wrote about what he prayed for the Philippians, a wonderful prayer. And then he begins to describe his situation. And we started last episode with verse 11. Well, by the way, you probably already know this, but I lose track of the fact that Paul didn't write this letter in chapter and verses, no more than you write your emails in chapter and verses, even long ones. What happened was, many centuries ago, monks in monasteries began to realize that as they were memorizing scripture, it was very helpful if they could break it down and rather than having these long passages, that there could be chunks. And here's the second thing. They also realized that when they wanted to refer to some part of a New Testament or Old Testament book in the Bible, they needed a way. Back in the day of scrolls, they could say, roll it to this part in the passage, but in books, you have pages. In any case, it would have been really hard if you didn't have the whole thing memorized to know right where to go to pick up just the thing that was being referred to. So, man, I take bunny trails. I have to apologize. So I'll do my best not to do that very often. But what we have as chapter 1, verse 12, Paul writes, "Now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear." I talked last time about the fact that Paul had an influence in the royal palace as a prisoner that he might not have had without some other kind of supernatural intervention otherwise. That him being chained to, many scholars believe, chained to, at the very least, guarded at 8 or 9 or 10 hour stretches by Roman soldiers who heard his message and saw his life, and they became infected with the same faith that drove his life. And they took it back. They took it to their friends, to their companions, their other soldiers, to their families. And so the viral contagion of the grace of Christ began to infect even Caesar's household and those in the palace. And one of the results, Paul writes, is that because of his chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. Boy, when I was a young person in my high school years and even in college, that idea of proclaiming the gospel fearlessly was generally used as a mark of whether you really were or probably were not a real Christian. And how you did that was part of the deal. I graduated from high school in 1971. I was kind of smack in the middle of the Jesus movement, where standing on the street corner and street preaching. When I was a freshman in college at Oklahoma State University, our campus ministry published it was like an underground newspaper, which we then took out and stood on busy corners of the campus and handed out. And you were supposed to do this with boldness. You were supposed to do this fearlessly. You were supposed to. I had this nauseating knot in my stomach every time I did it. And one of the only reasons I did it, to be honest with you, is because I didn't want to be marked as one of those guys who didn't have nerve enough to speak up for Jesus. I don't resent the people who put me into this. They were doing the best they knew to do. And I don't even hold it as the worst of my Christian experience. I do know this, though. When I talk with people about Jesus from who I really am, out of my normal nature, I'm because I'm doing it for a much calmer and a much deeper motive. I think it comes through, and I think people know about it. I am not the guy who's going to go out to the shopping mall and pull people over and try to present the plan of salvation to them. I'm not the guy who's going to go door to door in this neighborhood and ask, so if you died tonight, are you confident you would wake up in heaven? That isn't how I am wired, but I am the guy who will befriend people, who will take people into my confidence and gain permission to be taken into their confidence and share life on life. And because of my personality and my nature, my basic wiring and style of living, I tend to do my evangelism or take the message of Jesus to people using the tools God gave me. And so I look at this and I think, okay, I don't think I'll ever probably be in a place where I won't need help to be bold and have confidence to proclaim the gospel without fear. I'm grateful that I live in a culture where I don't really have to be very fearful. I can boldly talk about my faith, and probably the worst that will happen is that either I'll be maybe made fun of or not taken seriously, but nobody's going to punish me for it. There's no persecution in it for me. In Paul's day, this was not the case. There was a large degree of persecution to those who were witnessing to the life of Christ. Paul was among thousands of Christians at this time who it took courage. It took a great deal of courage to proclaim the gospel. And Paul said that his advantage of being in chains had given the brothers and sisters there in Rome, somehow had given them confidence. And then he says that they have become confident in the Lord. Stop right there. When I want to share my faith, the gospel, the hope of Christ, my confidence can't be in me. There's not enough of me for that. And what there is of me is not good enough for me to hold that for my confidence. My confidence got to come from the Lord. And Paul says that's what was happening. They became confident in the Lord. I want for everybody who somehow hears this, sees this, gets somehow involved with it, I want your confidence to come from the Lord. I want you to have confidence in Him. Yeah, I want you to be self-confident. I want you to be, I don't want you to be a withering wallflower. I want you to be a confident individual, but I want the source of your confidence to be the Lord of life, so that you will dare to proclaim the gospel without fear. Point of application here. What is the number one fear that holds you back from sharing the gospel? What is the number one thing that is it's the catch? It's the thing that holds you back from proclaiming the gospel. You're not evil if something is holding you back. But I will say your life will be richer and your walk with Christ will grow deeper when you confront that fear and you somehow work in partnership with Christ in confidence in Him so that you can proclaim the gospel without fear. Maybe you feel you don't know enough. You know what? You hardly need to know anything. I think there are fifth graders who are way capable of sharing the gospel without fear. You don't have to know all the theology. You don't have to have the Bible memorized. And I want you to think about this. When Paul was alive, there was no New Testament. He was writing the New Testament. And so his contemporaries didn't have the New Testament memorized. They didn't have the words of Jesus committed to memory. What they had was their experience of the living, loving Lord Jesus Christ working in their own lives. I heard a long time ago, and I wouldn't want to make too much of this, but there really should be 5 Gospels. There's the Gospel of Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, and there should be the Gospel of you. Your story, the story of how Jesus reclaimed you, remade you, rebirthed you. So if you're afraid that you don't know enough, I get that. There's an answer to that. Learn more. Intentionally learn what you think you need to know in order to represent Christ well. But I'll emphasize this. I hope I emphasize it always. It's not very often that you need to know more. It's most often that you need to do with what you already know. Okay, let's keep moving. Verse 15, if you're following along. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. Because of this, I rejoice. This gives us a window into Paul's experience that I don't think we see anywhere else. Here's the look through the window, and this is what you're going to see, that there are people who, knowing Paul is in prison, they picked up preaching the gospel so as to somehow put added stress, added pressure, added heat on him. I'd say that's pretty bad motive. If a person is going to proclaim the gospel and their whole motive is to make life more difficult for someone else, there's a problem there, right? And that's what Paul says. There are those people. He says there are also those who preach out of pure motives, and they truly simply just want people to know the good news of Jesus. It's easy to be happy about. It's easy to be thankful for and to be, what Paul says, he rejoiced. But you know what? He even said, I don't care if these people are preaching out of bad motives. The point is, I want the gospel. I want the truth of Christ to get out there. Wow. You know, I've had it happen in my life, and I don't know whether you have, that style in the way we do things has been a big issue for me. That guy doesn't preach very well. He needs to sit down and shut up and let somebody else do who really knows. Really? Or that music, man, that just is fingernails on the chalkboard to me. They need to sit down and shut up. And, well, you can tell. There are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. There is truth and there is error. Paul is not saying, I don't care whether they're preaching in truth or in error. That's not the point. The point is whether their motive is good or bad. If they're preaching Christ, then he says, what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, not error of veracity, whether their motives are true or false, Christ is preached. Because of this, I rejoice. I'd love to be able to be that mature. It is one of my goals to grow to a point of maturity where I will not be so dadgum hung up on style, not so hung up on my judgments about these others who are preaching and teaching, but that where if Christ is preached, that's the point. That's the point. Are they part of my church? Doesn't matter. Is Christ being preached? That's the point. And in that, Paul says, I will rejoice. Well, I've burned my time up again and then some. I'll see you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.